No, I have just been so impressed by the First Nation speakers that have spoken so eloquently to this. And, just incredibly impressed by our next speaker, Eriel Deranger. No, I live far from this area. I can go and I can do my photography and I can come back to that nice little cozy colonial cultural backwater of Victoria. Well, there's no escape for the people that Eriel Deranger represents. The Athabasca, Fort Chipewyan First Nation. And these people, Eriel's people, are taking it on the chin and working and giving everything they can to try to create a better future for all of us. I want you to give a very, very warm round of applause for real hero, Eriel Deranger.
Thank you, Garth, and thank you, folks from 350.org. First, I want to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Indigenous people whose lands we are on now, and thank them for allowing us to have what we have now. And so to them, I say masicho. And my file's still loading. Gotta love technology sometimes, although it doesn't always work with you. I've had trouble after trouble with my PowerPoint on this tour. There it is. So, in order to really understand the plight of the Athabasca First Nation, I really want to give you an overview of who we are. Because to talk about the tar sands independently of who the people are, it becomes very difficult to understand the impacts that we face. So, I'd like to start with this really great quote from one of our previous leaders, former Chief Archie Cyprian, who said, "The land is the essence of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nations culture, value, and spirituality." The Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation is a colonial name that was given to our people. Our people refer to ourselves as the Dene Sutlene, or the people of the land. Further to that, we refer to ourselves as the Kaikal Dene Sutlene people, which is the people of the willow. And that refers to the Athabasca Delta region, which is abundant with marshlands and willows. And the land is really who we are. These places of being identify who we are. You know, I really want to draw points back to the people of Aamjiwnaang First Nation in Sarnia. There are a lot of people that say, why don't you just leave? Identity and who we are comes from places on this planet. If you are Irish, your ancestors come from Ireland. If you are Scottish, your ancestors come from Scotland and English and so on and so forth. For many Indigenous people, our identities come from those places in which we come from. So as Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, we come from the Athabasca. The Aamjiwnaang people come from the Aamjiwnaang territory. Once you destroy those places, you destroy those people. Now, the mission and the vision of our nation is very, very simple. The Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation wants to lead a proud, culturally unified, and independent First Nation. We have a mission to foster growth and progress for our members by providing and maintaining opportunities with respect for land, water, and culture. It doesn't seem like a big request. But when we talk about the type of resource extraction and development that's happening in our region, you start to see that our values, our vision, and our mission are at odds with the type of development that is happening in our communities. Now, to think about even one step further, this isn't just about cultures and values and missions and visions. This is about actual rights in Canada. In Canada, we have unique rights. We have treaty rights. Treaty 8 was signed by the ancestors of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, and it's one of the 11 numbered treaties that the Crown entered into with First Nations between 1871 and 1921. These are nation-to-nation agreements. These are binding agreements. And these are not some ancient pre-civilization text that we should somehow forget about and move on. I often hear those types of comments in Canada that the treaties happened so long ago, it's time to give up. In fact, when I crossed the border to come to the United States, the Border Patrol officer said to me, "You know what I think about treaties?" And I said, "I don't know if I want to know what you think about treaties." He said, "You lost the war." And I'm like, "But we signed treaties, and those are actually legally binding documents." And then he said, "When has North America ever lived up to their agreements?" Now, further to that, our treaty was signed in 1899. 1899. My grandfather was born in 1898. My grandfather, not my great, distant, some relative that I didn't know, my grandfather. So my grandfather was alive at the signing of treaty. My great-grandfather was at the negotiations of treaty. This isn't some ancient text that has no bearing or relevance to my life. This has very strong relevance. And those treaties promised to our ancestors the rights to continue hunting, trapping, gathering, and fishing, and access to the Crown lands in Canada to be able to practice those rights. Now, these rights are not simply recreational rights. These are our livelihoods. They are a part of our culture and our identity and who we are as Dene Sutlane people of the land. Further to that, in Canada, those rights that we signed by treaty are further entrenched in Canadian law. The Canadian Constitution was amended in 1982 to recognize and affirm and protect the rights outlined within treaty. And the Indian Act, which is a very controversial piece of legislation in Canada, defines what those rights really are. And it states the Canadian Constitution Act of 1982 protects that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the rights of everyone else, should not preclude or be interpreted as negating Aboriginal treaty rights and other rights in Canada. That meant that our rights are paramount in Canada. That is in the Canadian Constitution. Our rights are entrenched in the Canadian Constitution. So our people are people of the land whose culture still runs rich today. We are people that continue to practice our cultural procurement, our dances, our songs, and our identity of people on the land. We continue hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering practices out on the territory, the practices that we have done from time immemorial. Our people rely on hunting, fishing, and trapping to provide food for our families. Our culture continues to be strong in our communities. I really like this photo, and I always like to draw attention to it because I really like the banner in the back. It says this, "Keeping our culture alive," because this was just from a few years ago. And I really enjoyed being at this culture camp because it was like the camp got set up, you know? It was just set up with everything that was there around us. We created the stove out of the very trees that surrounded us, and we cooked all of our meals on it. And at this camp, we taught the children how to create fish nets, how to put out the fish nets, how to bring in the fish nets, how to get the fish, how to prepare the fish, how to dry the fish. We prepared meat, we sang songs, we did beading, we had storytelling. And it was one of the best culture camps that I went to. After that culture camp, my daughter said, "When do we get to go back?" The scary thing is right now, that very culture and identity is being threatened by the industrialization of our traditional lands. And that went too fast. So the ACFN traditional territory, just to give you an idea of where things are at, this is sort of the overarching territory. It goes into, Treaty 8 is British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, into the Northwest Territories. Our traditional territory of the ACFN is predominantly this area right here, which goes into Saskatchewan and northern Alberta. But we also utilize this area, which is, we kind of call our buffer zone, because our members don't just stay within these boundaries. Many members go farther south, depending on the times of year and what animals they're looking for. To give you an idea of where everything is, the tar sands development is currently in this region, just south but within the area that our current members utilize for hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering rights as guaranteed to us by treaty. To give you an aerial view, not me, not Eriel. I'm trying to be funny. Sometimes it can be really heavy, you gotta add a little bit of humor. This is the Athabasca River system that flows, and much of the members of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation live in this township called Fort Chippewa. Fort Chippewa isn't a reservation. Fort Chippewa is actually a township, and it's a really diverse township. It has the Mikisew Cree, the Athabasca Chippewa, a Métis settlement, and a non-Indigenous settlement. And it's about 1,200 people, and that's it. This river is not simply a river. This river is a roadway, because in order to get to Fort Chippewa, you either have to go by river, or fly, or wait for the rivers to freeze so you can drive over them. So it's an isolated community, and the river is an important part of, it's the life, the main vein, the center of the community. And you see this right here? That's a satellite view of a tailings pond, precariously close to the edge of the Athabasca River. This picture, this aerial view, I believe is from 2004. Since then, I believe it might be even close to quadrupling the size and the area that these tailings now take up in this region. So our community is at odds. Our culture is at odds with this. This is raw bitumen, tar sands, oil sands. Call it what you will, right now it is contributing to the de facto extinguishment of treaty and Aboriginal rights in northern Alberta. The de facto extinguishment of rights that are entrenched in the Canadian Constitution, that were signed by my ancestors, that are living documents that are still utilized today. So the Alberta tar sands, where are they? Garth showed you some really great images, but to get a perspective geographically of where everything is located, there are 3 major sites for oil sands development. These are the 3. The Athabasca region, the Cold Lake region, and the Peace region. Most of the all of the open-faced mining projects happen in this red region. The rest of it will be done by in situ or SAGD. It is quite a large undertaking, and the types of abuses and violations to treaty and Aboriginal rights are not just in the open-faced mining region. They also exist in the Cold Lake region, where Crystal Lehman is from, and in the Peace region, where my friend and colleague Melina Labicon Massimo is from, and their communities. Melina's community in this region has no running water. In this region, the Beaver Lake Cree Nation, they're often on a boil water advisory. Near Fort McMurray, the Fort McKay First Nation that lives literally in the heart of the tar sands, they have sometimes cannot even shower or bathe in their water without having chemical burns. Children have had to be removed from the community because they cannot bathe. This is one of the richest First Nations in the world when it comes to what's in their bank account. But I don't call that rich when your children have to be taken out of the community in order to be able to live and breathe clean air and drink clean water. I really like to utilize this quote with a juxtaposition of the tar sands in the background because it's really powerful. There is nothing on this planet that compares with the destruction going on there. If there was a global prize for unsustainable development, the tar sands would be a clear winner. Dr. David Schindler, who's an ecologist he just retired at the University of Alberta, he has been one of the leading scientists that have been putting together data to prove that these projects are contributing, in fact, to growing greenhouse gas emissions, to the contamination of the river systems, and to the contamination of the traditional foods of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation and other First Nations. Because government and industry have been saying all of that is false. His research and studies are making government and industry look like fools. However, he's largely unread, and I encourage you to find some of his studies because they are well worth the read. Now, talking about overburden, because overburden is something that industry likes to refer to, when they refer to the boreal forests, the marshlands, the Athabasca Delta, they refer to it as overburden. And since operations have begun, more than 1.4 billion tons of what they call overburden has been removed. This is more dirt than was moved for the Great Wall of China, the Suez Canal, the Great Pyramids of Cheops, and the 10 largest dams in the world combined. That's why Stephen Harper calls this a project of epic proportions. I mean, that's really epic, actually. Tailings ponds. Now, the first statement that I have on here, annual licensed oil sands withdrawals are equal to a city of 3 million. That's pretty crazy when you just think about that, but then think about what I said earlier. The Peace River region First Nations don't have running water. In Fort McKay, their children can't bathe in the water. In Beaver Lake Cree, they're on boil water advisories. And yet we're still allowing concessions to industry to have the equivalent of 3 million people. The water quality impacts are poorly understood because Alberta didn't have the foresight to put in the proper monitoring to know what the quality of the water was before development, or during development, or even now. And every day, studies have been done by the Pembina Institute to find out that over 11 million liters of toxic contaminant are leached into the Athabasca watersheds and the Mackenzie River Basin every single day. Yet government continues to say their position is that's simply not true, that the contaminants that are now found in the Athabasca River system are natural. So, Garth talked about the in situ or SAGD. This is what it looks like. Government likes to call this environmentally benign. So environmentally benign, in fact, that it does not require a public review process. As long as all their ducks are in a row on paper, they get approved. SAGD has a larger environmental footprint. Yeah, you know, sure, they're not going to dig up as many trees and they're not going to destroy it as grossly as open-faced mining, but it has an immense footprint considering that 80% of tar sands development will be done through SAGD and in situ. To give you an understanding, this is the Fort McMurray, sort of south of Fort McMurray region. This is what it looks like. This is a tiny little portion of what they're planning to develop. The big white, this is open-faced mining. All of this in situ. To even get an even more grotesque view of the region, these are the leases and permits in the Athabasca region. You look on this map and you'll see almost every multinational oil and gas company from across the globe has their fingers in this pot. It is not simply some project of Canada, this is a global project. And the responsibility lies on everyone because we are all a part of this project and all a part of the problems that are happening. Let's go back to the actual impacts. Migratory pattern disruptions of moose, caribou, bison, songbirds, waterfowl, and fish, all of which are the traditional food sources of many of the First Nations, not just the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, but many of the nations that live within my region. It's not just disruption to migratory patterns, but it's contamination to our traditional food sources. In 2006, Suncor, one of the oldest and largest operators in the region, did a study because members were complaining about moose and the funny colors of their meat, and it tasted funny. So they took a couple moose that were around the sites and tested, and oh, lo and behold, 455 times higher levels of arsenic in the moose meat. The Alberta government was obviously very, very alarmed by this, so they did their own study. They said, oh, don't worry, that was just an independent freak accident, and the arsenic levels are actually only 17 to 33 times higher, so it's okay. Oh, and all of your meat might actually be contaminated. That includes the muskrat, and the waterfowl, and the caribou, and every other traditional food source in the region. So the First Nations said, we better check this out, let's see what's really going on. They hired an independent consultant who found that it wasn't just levels of arsenic, but mercury, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and aquatic life, but not just aquatic life, waterfowl, muskrats, beaver, and moose, all of which are traditional food sources to the community. I'm sure you can all imagine what that leads to. Toxic contamination and cancers. Now this report that I'm referring to from the Alberta Health Services, they found a 30% increase in cancers in the community of Fort Chip, leukemia, lymphomas, bile duct cancers, and other soft tissues. Now this report was actually very poorly done. So our nation is in the process of looking at more reports and more studies. We are in the process of finalizing a report that looks not just at cancers, but also looks at the incidence of contamination of our food sources. And we found that selenium, which is a highly toxic compound, is at such elevated rates that it poses a severe health risk to adults and children alike in all of our traditional foods. In addition, as part of that study, 94 members of Fort Chipewyan participated in that study, and of those 94 members, 22 of them had cancers, and of those 22, 27 cases of cancers were found. Now, this report that shows that there is elevated levels of cancer was concluded that, yes, there's elevated levels of cancer, however, it has nothing to do with tar sands because Aboriginal people live high-risk lifestyles. Because I guess we're all a bunch of, wow, I'm not even going there. So obviously the impacts of tar sands go far beyond the environmental impact. Now, I just want to preface some of this stuff. I'm talking about a lot of really harsh things against development. And our nation, we have cell phones. We have laptop computers. We are a part of society. And our mission is that we want to be a part of progressive society and growth. And we want that to be in line with our cultures and our land and the water and respect for all of those things. And we're not anti-development. We're anti-out-of-control development. We're anti-development that causes such severe impacts that people are actually dying. We want development that respects our treaty and Aboriginal rights. So government always says to us, oh, don't worry. We've got it all under control. We're going to put everything back, and we're going to put it back even better than it was before. In some cases, they've even said, oh, we're removing the contaminants, which is, they're saying the bitumen is a contaminant from the ecosystem, and what we're putting back is going to be better than it was. This is biodiversity. This is the boreal forest before. This is like what they like to refer to as equivalent land use capacity. Now you ask any First Nation member in the region, and they will tell you they cannot hunt and trap and gather in these regions. It's absolutely impossible. Now you take this and even take this next step. To date, only 0.02% of all tar sands operations have been certified as reclaimed. This is less than a total of 1 square kilometer. I've recently been corrected. They're getting better. It's 0.1% now, so a little over a square kilometer. This is what they've managed to achieve in over 50 years of development. Their reclamation techniques do not mitigate their impacts to treaty and Aboriginal rights. And if it's taken them 50 years to do this, how many generations of cultural land use will be lost? First Nation rights, they have become the key. Right now, the ACFN has sued Shell. We sued Shell for failure to meet the agreements that they signed with previous leadership. Now these agreements were agreements that they would mitigate the impacts to our treaty and Aboriginal rights, that we'd be involved with them in planning reclamation and community-based monitoring programs would be developed, and Shell has not lived up to these. And this is a great quote from our chief now, Chief Alan Adam. The fate of our communities and our river is at stake, and we are in the crosshairs of Shell's plans to aggressively expand tar sands in our traditional territory. Shortly after we filed suit, Shell had a project up for approval, the Jack Pine Mine. Now we tried to challenge this project, saying that the province and Shell had failed to adequately consult with us. This case, we lost this case because of a technicality. The technicality was that in the review process, they had made an amendment that stated they didn't actually have to address constitutional rights. No, they did have to address constitutional rights, just not treaty and Aboriginal rights. They literally put in a clause that said that they would not deal specifically with Section 35 constitutional rights. So Shell's current and proposed projects violate our treaty, destroy our lands, and contaminate waters that are critical to our survival. The Jack Pine Mine was ultimately approved, even though the panel found significant adverse effects and justified these effects and granted the approval for this project under the Oil Sands Conservation Act in the public's best interests. They found cumulative environmental impacts on ACFN's traditional resources and still allowed, this project involves mining out 21 kilometers of the Muskeg River. A river that's not just used as a river, simple as a river system, but as a roadway, as access to our cultural and hunting and trapping and fishing grounds. There's no way to mitigate the impacts to something like that. So First Nation rights in Canada have really become the sort of the strong arm, the stronghold for environmental protection, because something happened in 2012. Shortly before Halloween, Canada was passing something called the Omnibus Bills. Many of the First Nations refer to these bills as genocide bills because of what they did. Now, omnibus bills are traditionally budget bills. They're budgets. They talk about the budget. This was in a newspaper. Stay sharp, the Tories might try to sneak something past us, because it was an omnibus bill, which was simply a budget bill, 485 pages long. No one even bothered to read it. But what it had inside of it was sweeping and gutting legislative changes to environmental protection laws in Canada. The most alarming was the amendments they made to the Navigable Waters Protection Act, which is now called the Navigable, Let's Remove Water, Navigable Protection Act, where we saw 2.5 million lakes and rivers in Canada, the protection of 2.5 decreased to 62 rivers and 93 lakes. We lost the protection of over 98% of our lakes and rivers we lost protection of in one day. The waterways are central to the continuation of treaty and Aboriginal rights in Canada. And so what's happening with this is lending to the de facto extinguishment of treaty rights, not just in Alberta, but to many treaty First Nations across Canada. Now, ACFN is responding very harshly. We have defined what we call a protection zone. This area where our people utilize most of their traditional hunting, fishing, and trapping rights is also what we are defining as our protection zone. We have said, as put forward by our elders in an elders declaration signed in 2010, no development. Absolutely, unequivocally, no development in this range. There are projects proposed by Teck Resources, which is a Canadian mining company, Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, Koch Brothers, and I believe Exxon and ConocoPhillips, all within this region. In 2014, Shell is proposing the Pierre River Mine, and Teck Resources is proposing the Frontier Mine. Together, those projects would consist of the largest open pit mine in Alberta, and it would be directly across the river from one of our settlements on the Athabasca River system, and it would be on the breeding grounds of one of the last remaining herds of wood bison, and critical breeding grounds for the woodland caribou, both species which are supposed to be protected under the Species at Risk Act. Now, this area is also under contention because there's a policy in Alberta called the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan, which has identified this area, well, not all of it, but much of it, as bitumen priority use zones. Now, our nation has filed for a statutory review of that, citing that it is violating our treaty and Aboriginal rights, because we told them that while it was in draft form, yet they chose not to listen or heed our advice. The ACFN has also filed for a judicial review of the Jack Pine Mine project based on the same premise, that it is violating treaty and Aboriginal rights, that they even admitted so within the panel decision, and yet it still received federal approval. And so we'll be fighting these things in court. We'll be holding the line to protect what is ours. Not simply because it's treaty rights, not simply because it is written, but because if we lose these lands and we lose this territory, we lose who we are. A little bit narcissistic because it's me. But, you know. I like the quote, though. Our people and our Mother Earth can no longer afford to be economic hostages in the race to industrialize our homelands. It's time for our people to rise up and take back our role as caretakers and stewards of the land. Now, when I say that quote, I'm not saying that just Indigenous people have that role. We all do. We all come from someplace. My mother said to me that the people that colonized, the white people, I don't know what else to say, settlers, the white people that came over to North America.
Euro-American.
They are the most oppressed because they lost their way. from Mother Earth a long time ago. I'm only half a generation removed from the land. Some of my colleagues haven't ever been removed from the land. But many of you sitting here have been so many generations removed from the land that you've forgotten who your mother is, and that you've forgotten your role as stewards and caretakers of your mother. Now, you would never let your biological mother be sold and commodified. You would never say that you owned your mother. And yet we continue to put those mentalities on the very planet that gives us life. As an Athabasca Chippewan First Nation, as a Kaital Dene Sutlane woman, I know what it means to be connected to the mother. I know that the bears and the eagles and the moose and the caribou and the bison are my cousins and my relatives. The mountains are my ancestors. Father, Sun, Mother Earth, Grandmother Moon, these are my relatives. I don't simply do this because I think that we need to shut down the tar sands, because we can't shut it down. This industry is the bread and butter of over 160,000 workers, and they have every right to have jobs, including many of my family. But this is about, there has to be another way. We have the technology, we have the power. All we need is the political will to change the trajectory that we are currently going down. And we have to do something, and we have to do it now. I do this for my children, because right now, I don't live in my community. I live in Edmonton, and I choose to live in the city far away because I don't want to put my children at risk. When I took on this job, the leadership really wanted me to come back to the community for Chippewan, and I talked it over with my family, and my daughter said to me, "Are you crazy, Mom? I don't want to get cancer and die." This is a reality that many people can't escape from, and I'm privileged enough to be able to live in the city. And so I implore you, as we move forward and thinking about our energy and our economy, that there has to be another way, and that we have to reconnect with who we are as human beings, as children of Mother Earth. And so I thank you all for coming here today, and I thank you all, those that have been standing up the pipelines, against the pipelines, because those pipelines spell a green light for the expansion in my region. And so to that, and to those that are doing that, I say Masicho, and thank you, Masicho.
That's right. Thank you so much, Eriel. Well, we're moving right along. Just a few things to check in real quick. There's always the issue of forgetting people to thank. So thank you, Mom and Dad, wherever you might be. Thanks to all of our moms and dads. I did want to point out, I forgot to mention this earlier, you see a number of camera people moving around. Very excited that we have the independent film crew who created the incredible documentary Chasing Ice here. So you're all famous. I also want to acknowledge our friends, our other artistes. We have audio, visual, etc. We still don't have a sculpturist doing any of these things, but we're open to that. And we are live streaming this event tonight. I want to thank Brian Leonard and Heidi Viertaler in particular and the Main Exchange for their work. I somewhat selfishly refer to them and these other artists who work with us as the 350, 360 because they see everything, and we're really grateful for that. Martha Spees is here, who is incredible. She has some information about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Sorry, apparently there's a misinformation about cameras, but she needed the night off anyway. I also forgot to mention a sponsor, Food and Water Wash, Nisha Swinton, standing in the back with the bright top. And we're about to introduce our next speakers, but Sarah had something to say.
For the last 8 days, I've had the enormous privilege of learning from Crystal Lehman of Beaver Lake Cree and Eriel Deranger of Athabasca Chippewa. It has been an incredible honor to wake up every day and watch the way they start their day, standing in such courage and integrity, taking on this fight. And I just want to thank you so much for doing all that you do and for fighting the fight. And I want you to know we're all going to be standing very strongly beside you. The reality is that all of you are thinking, what can I do? What can I really do to help right now? And the fact is, right now, we need money. They need money. They're under the huge legal battle against the Canadian government. So I'm going to pass around some baskets, and I ask that you all give what you can tonight. There's also information on the tables back there on how you can give more. But they have the ability to fight and win this, and they're doing it for all of us. Thank you.
So it's about local, and we're going to hear about that, and local's pretty big in this conversation. I want to introduce the next speakers. Dylan Voorhees, who's the Clean Energy Director at NRCM. I also want to acknowledge, before I forget, Emmy Taberge, who is the Outreach Manager and Clean Energy Advocate at NRCM, who has done a tremendous job in helping us out. And a shout out to Todd Martin as well, who's their grassroots coordinator, who's been a tremendous help. So Dylan will speak and introduce Rachel Berger and Carolyn Graney, who are, again, representatives of the Protect South Portland group. And then we'll move to closing things up with the question and answer.
Thank you very much, Bob, and everybody. It's often said that's a hard act to follow, but I don't think I've ever had to say that with as much sincerity. But we'll do what we can and talk about a little bit the main connection. NRCM is very pleased to partner with 350 this evening in making this event possible. Many of you hopefully know who NRCM is. We're the state's largest environmental advocacy organization, a membership-based organization based in Augusta that has been working on the tar sands issue since 2009 and works in many different parts of our environment, including energy, in advocating not just around tar sands, but energy efficiency and clean renewables and climate change. We're really pleased to be part of tonight's event and part of this tour. Many of you were probably here with us last year when we brought Melina Massimo-Lubican to talk with you all and us about these issues, who Eriel mentioned. So my job, with help from Rachel and Carolyn, is to talk about what this means for Maine and what our connection to it is, which of course begins with our connection as people, as human beings who have a sense of morality and of compassion. But it's also a much more tangible connection, and I want to remind you all, many of you know about some of the parts of that. So, as Eriel mentioned at the end, the massive extraction of tar sands in Alberta depends on oil companies having access to global oil markets. And that's why for many years we've seen the proliferation of pipeline proposals across the continent. Most famously, I would say, in the United States, the Keystone XL pipeline from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. And each of those proposals has met with public opposition, especially out of concerns of what it means to send this toxic tar sands physically and literally through our backyards. And out of concerns about contamination of our waterways in the ways that the people of Kalamazoo, Michigan, or Mayflower, Arkansas have experienced. As probably all of you know, several years ago, these same oil companies sets their sights on the Northeast, where you find, if you look at these maps, you've seen a couple of them, Portland and South Portland are the only cities on the East Coast that are connected by pipeline to the crude oil pipeline network in North America. And that's, of course, a dubious honor. And it's brought us smack into dealing with this issue in a different way. Many of you know about the plan that's moving forward in stages to bring tar sands across Ontario to Montreal. It's the dark red line there, where it could be piped across New England from Montreal to South Portland through that orange line. The Canadian segment of that line, Line 9 as it's known, and it's owned by Enbridge of the Kalamazoo spill fame, could be approved in just a matter of weeks. You may not have heard about another proposal by TransCanada of Keystone XL fame that has been more recently proposed to bring an even larger amount of tar sands from Alberta to Montreal through existing pipelines, and then from Montreal, skirting right around the state of Maine to New Brunswick, where it could be potentially refined or exported again to global oil markets. It's quite interesting to note that circuitous route around the state of Maine. Maybe they're afraid of something. I think it's people like these, honestly. But it actually, even this pipeline proposal could threaten the waters of Aroostook County. And that's something that we're unfortunately going to have to be following. Certainly sending tar sands along the Montreal to Portland pipeline could threaten the rivers and waters in western Maine. It flows along and underneath and across the Androscoggin and Crooked rivers in western Maine, crossing them over half a dozen times. This is the picture of the Androscoggin. You can see the pipeline is right there. This is a beautiful stretch of the Androscoggin River, one of our special rivers here in Maine. And this is upstream of the dams and the paper mills, and it's a really important for outdoor recreation and for Maine's identity. Imagine a spill like the Kalamazoo on this river. In fact, we did a little imagining about a Kalamazoo-like spill on the Crooked River, and a spill up there in Bolster's Mills, and we've got some folks from this region who are here. If a spill happened on the pipeline, literally goes under the Crooked River there, and if it was carrying tar sands and a spill like the Kalamazoo happened, it would contaminate the entire river down to Sebago Lake, which is, of course, the drinking water supply that all of Portland and the region use. And in addition to that, it's one of the most pristine rivers in the state that is host to incredible fisheries and recreational opportunities that have been enjoyed for generations by residents, by summer campers, by tourists. And it's not just that one spot. A tar sands oil spill could happen in more than 20 places where this pipeline intersects with the river and the watersheds and the wetlands that are connected to this watershed. So we're fighting back here in Maine. Thousands of people are speaking out through petitions, through emails and calls to their elected officials. Communities all along the pipeline have passed resolutions expressing their opposition to sending tar sands through their communities. About a year ago, and it was very cold, just like a couple of days ago, 1,400 people gathered. Many of you were among them here in this city to say no to tar sands. And the citizens in South Portland have stood up in a unique way because of their unique exposure to this threat. And so now I'm going to turn the microphone over for a moment to Eriel Berger and Carolyn Graney, who are leaders among many leaders of Protect South Portland, the organization that we've been very pleased to work with, and many others, to help protect that city from this threat. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's so great to see so many faces out there. We are very pleased to be here. My name is Carolyn Graney, and this is Eriel Berger. We're both members of Protect South Portland. Protect South Portland was formed to stop tar sands from being handled and stored in our community and loaded onto tankers in Casco Bay. This disappeared, huh? Our group has, from the beginning, felt a strong connection to a larger network of individuals and groups working to make our planet a safer place. Over the course of our ongoing campaign, we've drawn strength from the knowledge that we're not alone in this effort, and moreover, that our actions can and will have wide-ranging consequences. You see her up there? Okay. Eriel is the founding member and the mother of the Protect South Portland group. She's going to say a few words about why she felt compelled to get involved in this effort.
Thank you, Carolyn. These are the words of the leading climate scientist, James Hansen. Tar sands equals game over for the climate. Those words, along with the group Elders for Future Generations, inspired me to gather friends and neighbors and begin the difficult yet exciting work of the past year. I'm an activist grandmother who cares deeply about saving the environment, and I also happen to live in South Portland, and our city is unique in its potential to stop this dangerous project from moving forward.
Eriel was soon joined by an ever-growing mass of local citizens and activists. The reasons we got involved were as varied as we were, and we are. The toxics being released from the smokestacks on Bug Light Pier, the potential for spills in Casco Bay, the risk to our drinking water in Sebago Lake, and tar sands' effect on climate. In addition to these concerns, many of us involved felt and continue to feel a strong connection to people and communities all along the pipeline. Places like Casco, Otisfield, Bethel, and particularly small rural towns like Fort Chipewyan in Alberta, Canada, are on our minds and in our hearts, reminding us that this fight is bigger than our little city of South Portland.
During one of our more difficult parts of the campaign, we were really feeling the damage of a well-financed multinational oil lobby could do to our simple local message. At that time, a video was delivered to us via Taryn Hallweaver of Environment Maine from Chief Phil Lane of Dakota and Chickasaw First Nations.
Mitakiapi, protect South Portland. I want to extend a very, very warm and loving handshake to each of the relatives there and say how inspirational and empowered I feel for the great work you're doing and beginning to prepare for what's coming towards you. And I really, really am so pleased to have this moment to just know that our prayers are with you. And that I'm so pleased there's some place left on this fertile island where a community of relatives are prepared to stand up and say, you shall not pass here. Because we had a chance to share and see the devastation this bit of this tar sand brings, not only to the communities it comes to, it goes through, but where it comes from. It's a desecration. And I have complete faith together that in the ultimate process, we will be victorious for our grandchildren and future generations.
He called us brothers and sisters and urged us to have strength and continue on. We were moved and honored, and his words gave us renewed motivation. In the fight against degradation of the planet, their villages and ours are forever linked.
As most of you know, on November 5th, the Waterfront Protection Ordinance was voted down at the polls by a very narrow margin. The very next day, however, in response to the overwhelming concern expressed by voters, the South Portland City Council began the process of adopting a citywide moratorium on tar sands. But there's more work to do. Now, as a direct result of the efforts of many of the people here tonight, a local committee has been charged with the task of writing a new ordinance to keep tar sands out of South Portland permanently. We know the committee has been given a difficult task, but we're confident that they'll succeed with the support and watchful eyes of hundreds of local citizens and activists. The City of South Portland itself, environmental groups, and communities stretching from here to Fort Chipewyan, Alberta. Our movement has grown from one individual who is determined to make a difference to one that crosses the continent. With all of this support, we will win in South Portland. But we won't stop there. No. Our connection to this larger community of active, aware, and enthusiastic protectors of our planet compels us to stay involved in this effort and to keep working until all communities, from one end of the pipeline to the other and beyond, feel safe from the threat and the reality of tar sands. Thank you.
It is a real honor again to have an opportunity to work with activists as passionate as Carolyn and Rachel and all of the others at Protect South Portland. I now want to take a couple more minutes and talk for a few minutes about some new research that's showing another aspect of the threat of tar sands that it poses specifically for Maine and our region. This map shows the measured warming, global warming, that's happened in states over the last century. It doesn't happen, as you can see, quite evenly. And unfortunately, Maine has seen more warming than most. In fact, over the last century, only 4 states in the United States have warmed more per decade than Maine. And we could have a whole evening on the threats that climate change poses to Maine, and many of you I know are familiar with them. But they are so myriad, from our sea levels rising, from storms flooding out our infrastructure, from ticks carrying Lyme disease and mosquitoes with West Nile virus, from impacts to our fisheries. If you are a shrimper or a clammer or a fisherman, you know that change has already been happening in our oceans. To tourism, to winter recreation, and the rest of it. And so the threat to our state goes on across many aspects of our lives. As has been said, the undisputed fact is that tar sands contribute significantly more climate-changing carbon pollution per barrel of oil or per gallon of usable gasoline than conventional oil. And that's because the massive energy-intensive operations that you've borne witness to this evening put so much of that pollution into the atmosphere to get the usable product. Each gallon of gasoline is at least 17%. Estimates vary. I think that's a low estimate. Maybe 25% more climate-changing pollution per gallon of gasoline. Now, we already have a climate change problem with oil in Maine. The recent report out from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection found that 86% of the global warming pollution, the carbon pollution put out in Maine, is from oil. So we already have a problem, and therefore a significantly increasing the carbon intensity of our oil products would completely undermine our progress to address climate change. Now, I know you were sitting there listening to the earlier presenters thinking, when Dylan gets up, I want to know how can we get some of that water poisoning, community destroying stuff in our fuel tanks? So that's the question you all have. What's in my tank? How can I get some of that? Well, a new report out by the Natural Resources Defense Council just this month really illustrates what's going on. And the good news, the good news is that the gasoline that you drove to get here this evening, assuming you drove, if you did, does not contain tar sands. It is not derived from tar sands. Virtually none of the gasoline and the heating oil used in Maine and the Northeast, at least as of the last time the data was available in 2012, is virtually tar sands free. This is a map that shows, this is a chart that, a pie chart that shows where our gasoline and heating oil comes from. A lot of it comes from the Gulf of Mexico. That's the blue chunk. A lot of it comes from in our broader region and from eastern Canada. And some of it comes from other places. This is how much of it is from tar sands. You can see perhaps those tiny slivers through the Gulf and through our region in Canada that comes from tar sands today. That's the good news. We are tar sands free today. The bad news is So less than 1% is how much is in your fuel mix right now. The bad news is that the infrastructure changes that are being pursued by the industry are changing that. And they're working furiously to bring tar sands into our fuel mix along with the rest of the country. And so this analysis showed what would happen if we do nothing to stop it, to the amount of fuel that you and I use here in Maine that comes from tar sands. And the bad news is that fuel supplies in the Gulf, this is the white bar, a significant chunk of that would begin to come to us from the Gulf, would be from tar sands. Similarly, in the yellow bar, supplies from our region and from Canada would begin to come more and more from tar sands. To summarize that, this is the different scenarios that were analyzed in that report, and this is where we are today. Virtually none of our fuel coming from tar sands. If we do nothing to stop it, that will increase to 5% in 2015, and by 2020 could increase to as much as 18% of our fuel coming from this water poisoning, community destroying, wildlife killing, climate destroying fuel source. Now, how much of that increase happens depends on the choices that are made. The approval or not of the Keystone XL pipeline will make a significant difference. And the changes in our region, to the refineries, to the pipelines in our region, all will have an impact on how much that would be. But any of those is obviously too much. And so it's imperative that we begin the process of confronting the reality that although today we are tar sands free, without action, we ourselves will become complicit in this destruction in a very direct and tangible way. This is an enormous climate impact. These increase of 18% of our fuel coming from this, from tar sands, would be adding 200,000 tons of carbon pollution in Maine every year. That's a very abstract amount. It's like adding 33,000 new cars on our roads every year. That's more than twice the amount of carbon pollution that are going to be reduced each year through the incredibly important policy, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, that limits power plant pollution of carbon. Letting this happen would be throwing the progress that we've made and our goals to go further out the window. So we have choices, and I'm going to end here with just a few remarks about those choices and what we need to do. But this is going to be an ongoing, it is going to be an ongoing struggle to stop this. We need to reduce the use of oil and our dependence on it, and not become addicted to a more disastrous form of that oil. And the solutions that we can use to achieve that are in front of us. Energy efficiency, weatherization, clean renewables like wind and solar, fuel-efficient cars that take us twice as far on a gallon of gas, electric vehicles that take us all the way there without using a gallon of gas. These solutions are here if we put our will to it. Ultimately, we need action at all levels. Ultimately, it's up to us at the local level, at the state level, at the regional level, and we're making progress. Obviously, you heard about the amazing work that's happening in South Portland, and I want to recognize in the audience two of the city councilors from South Portland, Patty Smith and Tom Blake, who are with us here. Here in the city of Portland, Mayor Brennan sent a message that I'll read just a sentence or two. Portland has made great strides in becoming a sustainable city, including a commitment to address climate change and reduce dependence on fossil fuels. I'm glad that Portland and Maine are tar sands free today, and I believe tar sands has no place here, whether as a toxic substance transported through our communities or as a source of fuel that would completely undermine progress on climate change. That's from Mayor Brennan from the city of Portland. So what the first step, and you'll have an opportunity, and I encourage you to stay in touch with NRCM and 350 and all of the groups about this issue about tar sands coming, this new side of this threat coming into our fuel tanks. I will say that the first step is information. Well, the first step is to say no, and we've done that, and we're doing that. The next thing that we need to do is we need to have information. We need policies that are going to track and disclose what is in our tank, where is our fuel coming from. And that's something that all of us need to be challenging ourselves, our communities, the institutions that we work with that buy fuel. What is in our tank? Where does it come from? What is the carbon intensity of that? So I hope that you will take from tonight a sense not just of despair, which is possible and sometimes easy in confronting the truth of this issue, but a sense of hope that you can be part of a better way and a solution. I hope all of you are signing the petition that is on your seats to say no to tar sands in all ways, including in our fuel tanks that may pass through pipelines far from here, but is nonetheless part of our responsibility. And so I'm going to ask Bob to come back up and close the program with questions and answers. But I just want to say on behalf of NRCM, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for supporting this important